What if you uncovered a multi-million-dollar lawsuit at your job and then filed a huge lawsuit against your powerful bosses, only then to see the entire lawsuit vanish into thin air? Well, one Rolex employee lived this very nightmare, and she claimed to have uncovered one of the biggest grey market schemes in Rolex history, but as soon as it went public, the lawsuit disappeared. This is the story of how one of the biggest lawsuits in Rolex's history was shut down by one bizarre legal move. Now, for most people that love watches, Rolex is seen as the holy grail. However, buying one is not quite as easy as just walking into the store with a little bit of cash, or a lot of cash for that matter. Now, for decades, the brand has kept the supply of their watches extremely tight, and this in turn turned the ADs, or the people actually selling the watches on Rolex's behalf, into the gatekeepers, right? You cannot get a Rolex unless you befriend or get on the good side of someone at an authorized dealer. And essentially they hold all the keys, so unless they like you, your chances of getting a Submariner or a Datejust or a Daytona are just non-existent. And let's face it, if you're going to buy a Rolex, you want to buy it at retail, and also the experience inside the boutique is generally a lot better. Now, for a lot of people, they don't have a choice and they have to buy in the grey market. Now, this in turn creates a really weird power dynamic because the ADs know that they have the leverage and they can get you to buy different things like jewelry and other watches that you don't really want or need. And some people are happy to play these games just so they can get the Rolex that they really want. However, for some people who don't want to play the game, the only other option is the grey market. Now, if you're not familiar with the grey market, it's not like the black market. We're not talking about stolen goods or fake replicas. What we're talking about are real Rolex watches that are in the hands of professional resellers. Now, somehow these resellers get their hands on brand new Rolex watches in the box, never worn, and we'll get to how they're getting those watches a little bit later on in the video, so make sure you stick around. And if you haven't already guessed, the reason they want those watches is because, say for example, you can get a Submariner at retail for $10,000, you can actually sell that exact same watch the next day in the grey market for closer to $15,000. And so the million-dollar question is, which we're all wondering, where do these grey market dealers get these brand new watches from Rolex in the box, ready to go, never worn? And before we answer that question, around 91.3% of you guys are not subscribed to the channel. If you enjoy this sort of stuff, then subscribe or leave a like or leave a comment. It just lets me know that I'm on the right track. Quick wrist check, I am wearing the Evermont in Imperial Green. I absolutely love this watch, to be honest, especially on the rubber strap, which is going to be available at emmettandscott.com, so make sure you check that out if you are interested in reserving the Evermont. But anyway, let's get back to the video. Now, for years, people have thrown around theories of where the grey market dealers actually get these brand new Rolex watches. And one of these is that some authorized dealers who are not playing by the rules are tempted by insane profits and are selling the Rolexes straight from the store to the grey market dealers. And this is an unforgivable violation of Rolex's strict policies. The kind of thing that if Rolex even gets a sniff that you're doing that, your license is instantly revoked. But then again, is it worth the risk? Because you would be making a hell of a lot of money. And so in 2021, a lawsuit against one of the oldest jewelry companies in America threatened to blow the whole thing wide open. And the dealer at the center of all this was not just a new jewelry shop that had just popped up. The jewelry shop had been in business since 1837. Based in the heart of Chicago, it was one of the most trustworthy and reputable dealers for both Rolex and Patek Philippe, two of the most famous and popular watch companies on the planet. However, behind the fancy showroom, there was something far more sinister happening. According to a 52-page lawsuit filed in February 2021, a multi-million-dollar racketeering scheme was operating under everyone's noses. And the whistleblower who brought all this to light was a former employee who worked in one of the retail stores called Susanna. And she alleged that both her and two other employees were fired for one simple reason. They were willing to tell the truth. Now, Susanna's lawsuit painted this wild picture of this whole system where this retailer would take the watches from Rolex and sell them directly to the grey market. However, the reason they got away with it for so long is because they weren't selling to grey market dealers in Chicago. They were selling to grey market dealers overseas in other countries. But so how did this whole thing supposedly work? Well, the lawsuit claimed that it all kicked off in December 2018, where the management of the boutique set up a massive sales goal of $10 million, promising all of the sales staff that if they hit it, their bonuses would be out of this world. And not only that, but if they met their sales figures, Rolex was also promising to send them more desirable watches in the next quarter. Now, around the same time, in December, January time, a new employee who had just started and was completely new to the retailer started selling an obscene amount of watches. And this is when Susanna and the other two whistleblowers claimed that everything started getting out of control. They alleged that in order to hide the backdoor transactions from Rolex auditors, the management of the retailer resorted to a laundry list of fraudulent practices. We're talking fake customers, fake receipts, and fake purchase orders, often using real customers' data that had came into the store to inquire about a Rolex to sell the watch to them, only it wasn't going to the real person, it was going to a grey market dealer who could sell it for a lot more. And if that wasn't crazy enough, they also faked selling a watch to LeBron James. You know the NBA guy? The one that's pretty good at basketball? That guy. Now, Susanna and the other two whistleblowers mentioned that all of the money that was coming from the grey market dealers from all these Rolexes that they were selling out the back door was all getting funneled through the business, which then led to new claims of money laundering and tax evasion. So this wasn't just a case of breaking Rolex's rules, this was moving directly headfirst into federal law. Now for Susanna and her former colleagues, this was a nightmare. She apparently refused to take part in the practices and therefore was then fired from the retailer in December 2019. And worst of all, the company said that it was because she had poor sales figures. Ironic. And then shortly after, two more whistleblowers who refused to take part were then fired for the same reason. Now, Susanna was not going to take this lying down. She enjoyed her job and she wanted to work at Rolex, but she just didn't want to engage in those types of practices. She wanted to offer a very honest and transparent service to customers. Now, Susanna did not take this lying down. She wanted to fight back, and she did. And in February 2021, Susanna filed her lawsuit against the owner of the retailer, the business itself, and her managers. Now the crazy thing is, her lawyers decided not to go for wrongful termination, which would have been the logical route, but more so the nuclear option, because they wanted to sue under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, otherwise known as RICO. Now if you're not familiar with RICO, it's essentially designed to take down organized crime. Think mafia bosses, drug cartels, and criminal enterprises. So by filing a RICO suit, Susanna was claiming that this wasn't just a business not treating their employees correctly, this was a criminal enterprise. And these allegations covered everything that they were doing wrong within this grey market scheme, like fraud, like tax evasion, like money laundering, and so much more. Now this news sent shockwaves through the watch world. And finally, somebody put it in a public court filing, basically confirming all the suspicions that people had about Rolex all along. Now this story was picked up everywhere, and for a minute, it felt like the entire universe for Rolex was about to explode. Now the retailer completely denied everything, immediately, and they basically said that Susanna was just a little bit upset because she lost her job and she just wasn't a very good employee. And they insisted that the company had been around since 1837, we have very strict traditions and values, we are not going to break those values for a little bit of money. And they geared up for a long hard fight. They called it a corporate shakedown and they refused to settle. Now at this point, it wasn't just the watch communities that were interested. It was the general public. This had got big, and people were just waiting for all the secrets to come out. And this is when the story really hits its peak. And something just very weird happened. And that's because in April 2021, the entire lawsuit just vanished into thin air. Court records actually show that the case was voluntarily dismissed by Susanna and her legal team. And this was so sudden, after so much build-up and so much momentum, that it left every single person who had their eyes on this case wondering, what on earth happened? You know, did they manage to come to some sort of secret agreement or settlement? Or did Susanna maybe crumble under the pressure? Or maybe the evidence that she had wasn't as strong as they thought it was? And when the truth came out about the case, it unsettled and frustrated everyone. And this is because the case was not dismissed voluntarily. It was effectively killed on a legal technicality. Now the lawsuit was dismissed without prejudice, which basically means that if Susanna's legal team wanted to reopen it later on at a later date, then they could. And this happened after some little back and forth in regards to which files and which information should be kept secret from the public. However, even when it restarted, it wasn't this big heated battle in the courtroom, it just evaporated into thin air. A complete anticlimax. A spokesperson from the retailer said that they were grateful that these baseless claims were abandoned and this whole situation was now in the rearview mirror. And for anybody interested in watches that was watching this whole situation play out, it was incredibly frustrating because we were just about to see what really happens behind the curtain of an authorized dealer. And it was just about to play out, just as we wanted. But all of a sudden, it just completely vanished into thin air. There was no closure. Nothing was proven, but nothing was disproven. However, if you thought the story was over, you'd be wrong. Because in March 2022, Susanna and the other two whistleblowers came back. And this time they filed a new lawsuit. Now the new suit brought back all the allegations that they originally brought up in regards to grey market dealings. However, the one difference was all three of the ex-employees were now listed as plaintiffs. And this was a clear signal to everyone involved, especially the employer, that although they lost round one on a technicality, they weren't going to go down without a fight. Now this whole saga is the perfect storm of what happens when authorized dealers do not play by the rules. And to be honest, it kind of defines how people see Rolex today and the modern watch market. Now there's always going to be an insane demand for Rolex, of course, but there's also a frustration. There's people in the comments of this YouTube channel and also my Instagram and TikTok that hate the way Rolex engages with their customers. Or at least should I say how the authorized dealers who have Rolex above the door engage with their customers. They act entitled, they act like they're better than you, and it's just not a good feeling when you leave the boutique, especially when you don't get the watch that you want. And to be honest, I think pretty much anyone with half a brain cell is at least a little bit suspicious of some backdoor dealings happening within Rolex ADs. Now while this case is still very much going on behind the scenes at the time of posting this video, it does serve as just a little bit of validation for those people who do look at Rolex in a slightly suspicious light. It suggests that that feeling that we have that the whole game is rigged and we're kind of being played a little bit is not just paranoia. The 52-page lawsuit that was filed by the three whistleblowers within that retailer, including Susanna, is almost the blueprint for how I think a lot of authorized dealers throughout the world can and may be operating. And to be honest, it might just be the ADs and Rolex working together to really get that balance of supply and demand perfect, to increase desire and to get people to buy their watches for far more than they're actually worth. But one thing that I'm interested in knowing is, what do you think? How does this make you feel about the luxury watch world? Does it make you feel differently about Rolex? Do you think Rolex is in the right? Do you think the authorized dealer is in the wrong? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. I am interested to have this conversation because nobody knows, so the conspiracies can fly. But anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. Subscribe, like, comment. I'll see you next time.